If alien abductions are real, who are the abductors? Are they malevolent beings that are using human beings as lab rats? What is the overall purpose of these abductions? Is it for genetic testing, creating alien-human hybrids, or some other nefarious purpose? Many have reported being dealt with rather harshly or treated with little empathy during their abductions. Over 40,000 people in the U.S. alone vanish each year without any trace of their disappearance. Are some being abducted and never brought back? Are some in the U.S. government or even world governments aware of these abductions? If so, what is their knowledge of it? Terry Lovelace, author of The Incident at Devlis Den, joins me to talk about his disturbing abduction experience and much more. Well, greetings and welcome to Passion for the Paranormal, bringing a passion for the paranormal to you. I'm your host, Curry Stegan, and it's so wonderful to be back here with you once again. I'm excited to have the guest that's joining me tonight, and his name is Terry Lovelace. And I've been trying to put together an interview with Terry for a long time. We finally made it happen. Terry is a fellow Air Force veteran, just like I am, and he's also the author of the book, The Incident at Devlis Den, where he recounts a very disturbing alien abduction account he and a friend of his had while serving in the Air Force way back in 1977. So excited to have Terry on the show. You're not going to want to miss this interview. And if you haven't been over to the Facebook page yet, please head over to facebook.com/passion, the number 4, the paranormal, and make sure you like and follow us there. We also have a new Facebook group, the Passion for the Paranormal Facebook group. We talk about a lot of topics that I cover here on the show. So if you want to join the Facebook group, you'll find a link on the Facebook page. You can just or you can just type in Passion for the Paranormal group, and it'll pop up. You can actually be approved in the group there. And again, we talk about a lot of different paranormal topics on the Facebook group, and it's a lot of fun. So hopefully you'll join the Facebook group as well. And if you haven't been over to the website, please head over to Passion, the number 4, the paranormal.com. And there you can catch up with past episodes. We've got some new Passion for the Paranormal merchandise available on the website. You can pick up a hoodie, a t-shirt, a coffee mug. They make great holiday gifts and fairly reasonably priced. So please hop over there and visit, and maybe you'll want to pick up a t-shirt or a hoodie or something like that for a family member or somebody else who's a listener of the show. The other thing I want to mention is word of mouth is one of the most powerful ways to share things. If you have a friend, a family member, or a coworker you think would like to tune into the show, please share a link with them and let them know about it. Again, that's the most powerful way to share, to advertise and to share with people. So hope you'll do that. And the other thing I wanted to mention is if you are an iTunes account user, if you have an iPad, an iPhone, or you just have an iTunes account, and you tune into the show that way, please make sure to hit the subscribe button and rate and review the show. It only takes a minute, and it helps us. It goes a long way in helping proof the show and help others to tune into it. So without further ado, I'm going to get into this discussion with Terry. Again, you don't want to miss this discussion. I think it's going to be an amazing one. And thank you so much for tuning in. Okay, joining me on the show tonight is Terry Lovelace, and Terry served in the Air Force as a medic and EMT at Whiteman Air Force Base from 1973 to 1979, and earned a bachelor's degree in psychology from Park University and a law degree from Western Michigan. He practiced law for many years before retiring as an assistant attorney general for the state of Vermont in 2012. In 1977, while serving in the Air Force, Terry and a friend of his had a UFO encounter and abduction experience while camping in Devlis Den State Park in Arkansas. Terry is author of the book Incident at Devlis Den, which was published in 2018, where he talks about the event and about his UFO encounters as a child. Terry also speaks at numerous UFO conferences and events throughout the U.S. Hey, happy Veterans Day, Terry, and welcome to the show.
Hey, happy Veterans Day to you, vice versa. I know you're a United States Air Force veteran yourself.
That is correct. Retired a couple of years back, and I know you served 6 years. Thank you for your service, and it's an honor to have you on the show. I've been aware of your story for quite some time, and I've always been fascinated by it, as well as many other UFO accounts out there. There's so many out there, but I was always fascinated by yours. I got through some of the book, didn't get through all of it. But maybe if you could take us back, and I know you had an incident that happened a couple of years before the incident at Devlis Den. You and Toby, while you were serving on duty, can you talk a little bit about that first incident you had?
Yeah, that was 2 years earlier. That was a cold January night, 1975, and Toby and I worked the emergency room together. And we drove an ambulance, and we responded to, anything on the base, a heart attack, an airplane crash, whatever it was, we were there. And we had a call to, I refer to it as Kilo 5, and I think that actually was the name of it. And it was a launch control facility where they housed a Minuteman II ICBM, intercontinental ballistic missile, and a missile technician doing routine missile maintenance fell off a ladder. The Minuteman II is 60 foot in length, and there are panels along the side of the thing. And we had to go out to pick him up. And when we got to the scene, they had a roadblock set up about a mile from the place, and there was this big orange glow all over the site where it was about 20 security police guys with M16s. I mean, they were taking this, like a breach. And we had no idea what was going on, but it was below zero. And all of these exhaust fumes mixed with all of these overhead lights kind of going out of sync made this really eerie glow over the place. We rode up on the scene, and here's this captain standing in the road with a microphone, a walkie-talkie in his hand. And he's like, pull over there. Your man's walking and talking. I'll let you know when you can go in, but till I authorize it, nobody goes in, nobody comes out. And he's referencing the gate that goes into the little area where, I don't know if you were ever on a SAC base, where they had a launch control facility. And they have a little trapezoid building, and you open the door, and there's an elevator with one button, and it goes down 60 feet to the base of the missile. And we're sitting there in this ambulance with the engine running, and our windows are frosted over. And I can't see what's going on. I told Toby, I said, hey, man, I want to know what's going on. And the captain had said specifically, stay in your vehicle and stay off the radio. So, Toby, being kind of impetuous, throws on a parka and opens the door and says, I'm going to have a look-see. And he gets out of the ambulance and shuts the door. I'm thinking, oh, here we go. And he comes back about 3 minutes later, and he opens my door, and he grabs me by the shoulder, and he's pulling me out of the ambulance and saying, man, you have got to see this. You have got to see this. And I'm like, Toby, calm down. Let me grab my parka. And I got out of the ambulance, I'm throwing on my parka, and everyone is looking up, including the captain with his mouth open. And 50 feet, there's a blue dome that covers the launch tube. And 50 feet over this blue tube, lit up by all of these security police vehicles, they had those searchlights on. And lit up is this, about the size of a Suburban, kind of a diamond-shaped matte black thing. Now, I don't know what it was, but it was crazy. I mean, when I first saw it, your mind kind of rebels. And I mean, I'm looking for wires, and I'm thinking, what? And then I realized that's sitting absolutely stationary in the air.
Wow.
And it was incredible. And I'm standing next to the captain, and while we're watching, this tale takes place over the span of about 10 seconds. While we're watching, the thing shoots off over the horizon. I mean, 0 to 1,000 miles an hour in the blink of an eye, and it's gone. And his captain turns around and smiles at me real big, like, did you see what I saw? And I mean, for a moment, it was like, rank was aside, and he was just a fellow human being. And then he snaps back into it and says, get your ambulance, we'll get your guy up, and you can go in and get him. And we got our guy, and he fell and broke his ankle. And the captain had him seated in this little trapezoid building with the elevator with no windows, and he was seated in a chair with his foot on a trash can. So he hears all hell breaking loose outside. And he's like, what's going on? What I missed? What's going on out there? What I see? What's that? You know, he was just, I felt sorry for the guy. You know, all the way back in the ambulance, instead of talking about, you know, his ankle, you know, he was talking about, what did you guys see? What did you guys see? And of course, we told him everything, you know. And he's like, oh man, I missed it. And I'll tell you, I thought it was really funny. I expected the security police to debrief us. Now, the hospital commander debriefed us and asked us each to draw a picture of what we saw, which we did. And he made photocopies and kept the originals and the photocopies. And he asked to see my ambulance run report. And of course, I made no mention of, you know, of seeing this diamond cut UFO hanging around. But what he did do was the times. There was a lag time, I guess, that concerned him. And before he made a copy of my report, he took a black magic marker and marked out the time, all the times, the time that we left and the time that we returned, and initialed it. And says, don't worry about the times. He ran a photocopy, gave me the photocopy, and said, here, file this for your report, which I did. And on our way out of the hospital, coincidentally, we see a security police captain and a sergeant giving this poor guy the third degree, you know, the patient that we carried in. And I'm like, this is kind of nuts. You know, they're talking to the only guy out there that didn't see anything. And it was pretty funny, but you know, it wasn't the least bit paranormal to us. You know, we were certain that thing somewhere on it had either CCCP or USAF on it. I mean, we didn't think of it as a UFO. I mean, as a kid, I saw UFOs twice. Once when I was 8 and once when I was 11, and they were saucers. You know, so my logic at age 22 was, well, this wasn't a saucer, ergo, this is not a UFO.
Right.
And Whiteman, along with all the other SAC bases, the buzz was, now I never saw this personally, but security police guys told me about this. And I don't know what your AFSC was, but they swore that there was an orange disc that would show up once or twice a year over the bunker where they kept the nukes for the B-52s and shine a laser light down on the bunkers. Now, like I say, that's hearsay. I never saw that. I only heard that from people who said they saw it, but I wouldn't doubt it.
Yeah, that's interesting because that sounds similar to accounts made like at Rendlesham when these UFOs had been over the bunkers, that sort of thing. So that sounds kind of similar to some of the other accounts I've heard at missile bases. And you had Robert Salas that talked about his encounter at I think it was Malmstrom Air Force Base.
Yeah,
was a missile officer, and that kind of sounds similar, and that's interesting. What I would like to ask about this triangular craft that you've seen now. Do you remember hearing any noise at all associated with it?
No, it was dead silent. And I'll tell you, when I talk about silence, I really need to delve into the topic just a little bit. My friend Toby came up with this idea that we should go camping. Now, he grew up in Flint, I grew up in St. Louis, Missouri. Neither one of us had ever been camping before in our lives. And I'm like, well, you know, I had a nice camera I wanted to try out, and you really can't do much with a camera on a SAC base. So
sure.
He said, let's go out. You can photograph wildlife. And this guy, he was a really smart kid. He had taken physics classes from the Extension University and aced them all. And he really, really wanted to go to University of Michigan and study cosmology or astronomy, one or the other, and then get a PhD and then do postdoctorate work. And he had it all. He had his future all planned, and it all involved the night sky. So he said this is great little park. It's got high ground on it, lots of rocks and bluffs and stuff. And he says we just go to a piece of high ground, set up camp. And he said, you know, you can photograph wildlife all day. I'll sit up and watch the sky at night because there'll be no light pollution. And I didn't realize he was thinking, well, we're not going to stay in the campground, which, you know, kind of makes sense. I mean, you know, if you're going to go out and photograph wildlife and look at the night sky, a campground isn't the place to do it. I mean, you might as well camp in Walmart's parking lot, you know. So we trespassed, actually. I don't know. I posted it on my Incident at Devlis Den Facebook page. I just got a map coordinates from Astonishing Legends from Scott Philbrook. Using my description from Devil's Den, he found the spot. It's still there, exactly as we described it. And in the book, I talk about this OSI agent giving me a hard time saying, did you boys know that's federal land? And I'm thinking, no, are you nuts? I'm not that stupid. It wasn't federal land. That's a state park. But we had trespassed. And according to Google Earth, and if you go on my website or my Facebook page there, you can see the Google Earth views. And it shows a triangular-shaped piece of land, actually kind of horseshoe-shaped in a weird way. It was horseshoe-shaped from the ground anyway when we were there. But here's the interesting thing. It's an elevated plateau. It has no paved roads to it, just ruts in the road. But the top of that thing should be covered with 40-year-old mature trees. It's not. It's groomed. Matter of fact, a landscaper sent me a note and said, yeah, he says, I've looked at it. He says, this is cut. He says, this is groomed. So the U.S. government, and it is still to this day restricted federal ground. We went through a chain fence, thinking we were going deeper into the park. We didn't know we were going into a federal preserve, and it's astonishing to me that I had nightmares after I saw it because it is the same place where this all happened, and the U.S. government. I guess it would be the Bureau of Land Management, because I don't think it would be the Parks Department, burning an awful lot of gas over the past 40 years, keeping that spot, groomed so nicely. And I just got to ask why.
Right.
And I think I know why.
Interesting. Now, were you aware of, after the incident, the 1977 incident, later down the road, did you research and find out whether there were other UFO sightings and encounters in that location?
I didn't at the time. I had my hands full with being under investigation by the OSI and having welders burns to my eyes and I think radiation burns all over my body and being sick as a dog. So I had a lot on my plate. And I tell you the truth, I had an aversion to the place. But in 2016, when I was researching my book, I couldn't find anything. I couldn't find any newspaper clippings. I couldn't find any, I did about a half a dozen local papers, and I couldn't find anything to the date, which I think was June 11th, 1977, a Saturday.
Yeah, take us back to where this all started back in 1977. I know you're in the tent. You've seen some lights, or maybe I'm mistaken. When this thing started, you were not in the tent. Take us back
let me start with the campfire. That's really where things get started. We got off to kind of a rough start. We made a series of missteps. Nothing big, but we just forgot a lot of stuff we should have brought. But we made do. And we blew up some air mattresses. We had some blankets from the hospital. And Toby put together the tent. And we're kicked back on these air mattresses. And we're just chatting. We're just talking. And I remember saying to him, you know what, man, I can see the allure of this. I see why people go camping. This is pretty pleasant. And it was, the smell of the smoke and all that. And he had the gloat, and he's like, yeah, man, I told you, And And then a short while later, like there's a lull in our conversation, and I noticed that all of the sounds of the forest that I'd heard earlier that were making it almost even difficult to talk to one another had all stopped. And it was quiet. I mean, I know that sounds cliche, but I swear to God that's true. It was dead silent, and it unnerved me. And I even, our campfire, we even lost the breeze that we had. And in the campfire, I'm looking at this tree in back of our tent, and I'm thinking, you know what, I should see the leaves on this thing move. Even though there's not a breeze, they should move. And while I'm in that mental space, Toby says, hey man, were those there before? And he's pointing to his left. He's got his head turned, and I look to my left, and I'm like, what are you talking about? He says, those lights, man, look at those lights over there on the horizon. Were those there before? And I said, no, I don't think they were. I mean, we were in a remote area. There was nothing, anywhere. And we saw 3 tiny stars. Well, I shouldn't say tiny. Each star was about the same luminosity as a North Star, so they were pretty bright. And they were in this tight little triangle that sat squarely on the horizon. And when I'm looking at it, we're debating about, man, I wonder what that could be, you know? And I remember this distinctly. I felt this feeling of calm wash over me. And it felt like mild sedation. And I was calm. I was inappropriately calm. And Toby was in the same state of mind. And there's hardly a word spoken between us. And we're watching this thing as it floats across the night sky, and it's tumbling in the air. It's not just moving straight, but it's tumbling. And I remember thinking that it's not just tumbling haphazardly, it's tumbling with purpose. I don't know what gave me that feeling, but I had that feeling. And it grew and it got bigger. And I remember Toby said, that thing's coming right at us. And I said, yeah, Toby, I think you're right. And we watched as this thing got huge. These 3 points of light just expanded, always equidistant to one another. And as it moved across the forest below us, because we were on high ground on this plateau, we could see this triangular shaped shadow, which was kind of creepy, move across and headed in our direction. And the lights on the apex, each point of the triangle, had kind of dimmed, so it wasn't quite as bright as it was, but it still lit up the forest pretty good. And it comes to a stop over our heads at about 3,000 feet. And I feel another wave of sedation wash over me. And all I want to do is go to sleep. And I can't explain it, and it makes no sense, but that's what happened. And with this thing at 3,000 feet over our heads, from underneath, there came a beam of light. And it was a visible stream of light, like a searchlight cutting through fog, if that makes sense. You could see it. And it was about the diameter of a softball, and it just, like someone flipped the switch. Boom, it was on, and it was centered right in the middle of our campfire. And that lasted for maybe a minute. And then, just like someone flipped the switch again, it turned off. And immediately afterward, in its stead, there came this laser light. And this thing was bluish purple. I'm a little bit colorblind, so I have trouble with colors that are not fully distinct, you know. And to me, it was a bluish purple. And this blue light landed. It would land in our campsite, stay there for a millisecond, and then show up in a different place. And it was doing that like 10 times a second. So it had the illusion of, we saw this thing like dancing all over our campsite. And this light struck me in the chest and in the lower part of my abdomen. I never felt a thing. I know it struck Toby. And I had the feeling this thing's scanning us. And then that shuts off. So we're sitting there in the quiet, and my friend Toby stands up and says, "Show's over," grabs his sleeping bag, throws it in the tent, and dives in on it face first. And all I wanted to do was go to sleep. And I went and I threw mine in, and I fell on top of it. And the last thought that I had was, because Toby told me, he says, "The crickets and the tree frogs, they'll be back. Just wait, they'll be back." My last thought was, yeah, man, you're wrong. They did come back. And I was out. I was just out. And I'd come to realize this had about 4 hours passed. And I'm in the tent, and I see these brilliant flashing yellow and white lights coming through the canvas of the tent. And I wake up, and I'm confused. I don't have my wits about me. And I'm thinking, what are these, like? Oh, yeah, we're camping. These must be the overhead lights of a ranger's truck or something. And I could hear this. Then I could hear a noise. Then I heard a mechanical droning noise. You know, the kind of thing like a big machine would make, something that's more powerful than it is loud.
Sure.
And these intermittent, brilliant flashes of white and yellow light. And I get to my knees, and I'm really in a lot of pain. And during one of these intermittent flashes of light, I can see Toby's on his knees, peeking out the tent flap on his side of the tent, and he's crying. And he's got these tears rolling down his cheeks. And that scared me. After that, all that sedation, that's all gone now. I was scared. And I thought, man, I don't know what's going on. And I asked Toby, "What's going on, man?" And he did the universal fingers across his lips. "Shh, I think they're still out there." "Ooh, Toby, who are you talking about? Park rangers? Is it park rangers?" And he didn't respond to me. And I got up and I moved. I'm on my hands and knees, and I'm scooch him to the left with my left shoulder, and he's now got his head on my shoulder, and he's sobbing. And I look out the window, and I saw 12 to 15 what I first took to be children, and they were walking all around this big meadow. And that craft that had docked at 3,000 feet over our heads is now descending and is about 30 feet over our heads. So I'm immediately impressed with how big the thing is. I mean, it's a city block on each leg of the triangle. It's a city block long, and it's deep. Interestingly, there's an account from the Hudson Valley of a woman who saw the same triangle. You know, normally they're like 1-story tall triangles. She saw a 5-story tall triangle in the Hudson River Valley in 1977. And yeah, this thing was huge. It was absolutely immense. And what was crazy was that, well, I'll get to that in a minute. But I asked Toby, I said, "Toby, how are these kids doing out here in the middle of the night?" And he says, "Man, those ain't no little kids, Terry. They ain't human beings. Look at them. Don't you remember? They took us and they hurt us." And then I had some memory. Now, obviously, I was gone for 4 hours, and I have bits and pieces of memory I've recovered over the years through nightmares and through. Actually, I just had a recent hypnosis session, which was enlightening. And I look at them again, and I can see he's right. Their heads are disproportionately large for their torso. Their arms are long, and every one of them walked with this distinctive gait. They walked like they had sore feet, like they had, shoes on that were too small or something.
Right.
And it was just insane. And I am scared out of my wits. From the center of this craft, there came on another beam of light, about 30 feet in diameter. And again, it has that same searchlight cutting through fog quality to it. It's a visible beam of white light. And these little guys are all paired up in 2s and 3s, and they would wander into this light and just dissolve and be gone. And I'm just too afraid to say or do anything other than breathe. And we watched until the last two guys were absorbed by the light. And as soon as they were gone, the light turned off, and the noise that it had been making stopped. And the lights on the corners of each point of the triangle that had been yellow and white now switched to all white light. And there was a beam of bright light that ran up and down this light bar, 5 stories tall, on the apex, on the point of on each point of the triangle. And I remember thinking, that's what gives it the illusion that it's a twinkling star when it's in the sky. And I don't know where I got that flash of insight from, but I think that's right. And we watched it take off, and it didn't shoot off like a rocket. It just lifted off like a hot air balloon and just kind of rose slowly into the sky. And we rolled over on our backs, and we watched it until it was just 3 tiny dots of light, and then 1 dot of white light, and then poof, it was gone. And we were so terrified. We sat in the tent. Toby had to get his breathing under control because he was hyperventilating. And he said, man, we got to get out of here. And this sounds odd, but just that canvas covering us gave us cover. And I thought, we're going to be vulnerable if we go outside this tent and we're out in the open. And to this day, I have a big aversion to being out in big open spaces. I'll walk a mile out of my way to get somewhere to avoid cutting across an open space. And I took my keys, he took a flashlight, and we darted for the car, got in. Of course, had to turn on the dome light and check the car out. The car started right up. Thanks to Toby's unerring sense of direction, we were able to navigate out of there at night, which I didn't think was possible. He had actually made some notes in the back of a bank piece of, like a bank statement that he found in my glove box with a pencil. So he knew where the turns were. And with a flashlight, he could see his little map. And if you look at it on Google Maps, you can see it's terrain. It was cut out for a Land Rover, not for, a 66 Impala. It's unfortunate we didn't break an axle.
Sure.
And there were 2 overriding thoughts, and that was, I had never been so thirsty in all of my life. I just wanted something to drink. That was, when we got back to the airbase, to Whiteman, we were admitted to the hospital. I found out later we were classified as acutely ill with burns, not classified as burns, or just they didn't classify it as a third degree burn, 1st degree burn, 2nd degree burn, which they should have. They put burns, etiology unknown, and arc welders burns to our eyes. And while I was in the hospital, they separated the 2 of us when we got to the hospital. And they knew we were coming because, there was a chain across the road at the park for the restricted area, but it was just, the chain was just locked around a loop on itself and hung over a post on a nail. So Toby got out and he lifted that chain up and let it drop, and we just drove in. So I think the park rangers the next morning discovered that somebody's been trespassing, or maybe saw the smoke from a campfire or something. I don't know. That campfire should have been dead cold. But we left everything there, including Toby's backpack with his name and address in it. So park rangers called the base and said, hey, we think 2 of your guys out here had a campsite set up, and we don't know what they're doing. It looks like they're planning on coming back. Maybe they got a marijuana plot out here or something. We're going to check it out.
Oh, boy.
So, I'll get to that. The OSI agent, I'm not sure if you had dealings with the OSI. This was my first and only dealing with the Office of Special Investigations.
Yeah, and I did in the course of my career, and I actually worked as an intelligence officer, and I had dealings with OSI. However, most of mine were positive. Unfortunately, yours were not. Take us to that point, because I think that's where it really gets interesting. And let me just say this. Here we are on Veterans Day, and I served 25 years in the Air Force, had a great career, had wonderful experiences for the most part, but hearing this story really kind of takes me back, and I think, wow. But let's get into that before we talk any more about that. Maybe if you can get into what happened when the OSI agents arrived.
Yeah, I sure can. I'm in a hospital bed, and the lights were turned off for my comfort, so lights hurt my eyes. The hospital commander gave me an order that I was to have no contact with Senior Airman Tobias in any way, shape, or form. And I didn't understand that. But he says that means no passing of notes, no contact through third parties. You're not to talk to Senior Airman Tobias. Do you understand me? And of course I said yes, but no, I didn't really understand the reason. And they cut orders for him to Japan. Like at light speed. He was PCS gone. But let me get back to my hospital stay. My night nurse came in, and she had a pain medication. They give me pain medication at night. And you know how it is. We worked in the hospital squadron, and you kind of take care of your own, so they made sure I was comfortable. And as she came in, these two guys in business suits, blue business suits, walked in behind her. And the elder guy was kind of short, and he had the flat top haircut like was in the 60s, and the square jaw kind of thing going on. And he says, if that's going to sedate Sergeant Lovelace, it'll have to wait. We have to ask you just a couple questions. And of course, then they show us the nurse, and they show me their credentials. I noticed that the guy in charge was a major, and the other guy was a captain. And the captain raised up the foot of my bed, and they started interrogating me. And I had never had any interaction with law enforcement before, so I'm scared out of my wits. And I knew this. I wasn't about to tell anyone what I saw, because I was seriously worried I'd end up on a psych ward.
Right.
That'd be the end of any career, genuinely. Even if our two accounts matched, we'd both be in a psych ward. So he asked me, what were you boys doing down there? Do you have a little marijuana plot down there? Is that what this is about? And this is 1977, and I got, thoughts of Leavenworth flashing through my mind. Because I'm thinking, what if by happenstance somebody's growing a little marijuana out there and they want to hang it on us?
Right.
And I said, no, sir. That's not the case. That's not the case. And he says, well, then why would you leave all your stuff there? I just don't understand that. And that was a valid question.
Sure.
I couldn't answer. So anyway, at the end of the discussion, the nurse came back and said, Dr. So-and-so wants Sergeant Lovelace to have his pain medicine now. And they pack up their stuff. And, they had me sign 6 forms. One of them was a consent to hypnotic regression and chemical enhancement. Now, those might not be the exact words, but they're pretty darn close. I had flash burns to my eyes, and it hurt to read. And I'll tell you the truth, I was so scared, I didn't really read much. And the nurse gives me an injection. She leaves. The captain leaves. He swoops up all the forms I've signed and throws them in his briefcase, and then he shuts the door, and he turns the light out, which was kind, and he kind of drops this tough guy affect on his face, And he gets down right next to my ear, and he whispers, and he says, son, he had this Louisiana accent. If you've ever heard Calvin Parker speak, that Louisiana thing going on, it was like, son, I know, and you know, you two knuckleheads stumbled onto something out there, didn't you? And I didn't answer him. And he says, oh, I think you know what I'm talking about. We both know what I'm talking about, don't you? And I said, no, sir. He says, yes, you do. And, you know, I had this reputation in the hospital squadron for being an amateur photographer. I liked photography. I had a black and white dark room set up in my house and base housing, or my house. And so everyone in the squadron knew I was an amateur photographer. And I forgot my camera, honest to God. But Toby had his. And, you know, the thought of taking a picture of this thing never crossed our mind. Never crossed our mind. But this OSI agent says, all I want to know is how many pictures of it you took, and where's your camera, and give me your film. And this will all go away. It's easy as that. And I said, sir, I didn't take any pictures of anything. And he turns back on the tough guy affect, and he gets down and says, I don't believe you. And he left. And he knew. I don't know how he knew, but he knew. I mean, he said it by inference, but I don't know what in the world else he could have been referencing, you know?
Right.
And then I had that confirmed 6 weeks later when they called me to the USI office. And they sat me down in an interrogation room. And you're probably familiar with them. I got familiar with them in my law practice, you know, the rooms with the framed mirror on the wall. And this had a small room with those gray military-style desks from the 1950s. And the padded chair on rollers that goes with the desk. And then in each corner of the room, there was one of those fiberglass chairs from the 60s. And a clock on the wall, and that was it. And I got sat in this room by myself and told someone would be right with you. Well, it wasn't right away. It was like 3 hours later. And I think that was calculated on their part. I do. And you may know that better than I, but I think that's probably the case. And finally, the two OSI agents that were in my hospital room came in, and they ignored me at first. And then the lead agent said, well, did you find any camera and a film for me yet? And I said, no, sir. I don't have anything. And he says, well, it doesn't matter. He says, we can maybe clear this up today and close your file. Would you like that? And I said, yes, sir, I'd like that very much. I'd like to put this behind me. And he says, good, that's very good. Well, so just cooperate with us today and we'll get through this, okay? And I said, yes, sir. And he says, and you know you're going to be hypnotized today, right? And I said, hypnotized? No, sir, I didn't know that. And I don't understand why. And he cuts me off, and he goes through my file, pulls out that piece of paper that I signed, and he slams it down on the desk in front of me, and he says, is that not your signature, son? And I said, yes, sir, it is. And I knew that, you know, I'm going to have to do this. And I'm thinking for a moment I should ask for a lawyer or do something else. And I spoke up, and I said, sir, I just don't understand why, and I really don't want to be hypnotized. And he says, well, you don't have to be, son. Ain't nobody got a gun to your head. He says, I'll tell you what we'll do. If you want, I'll tear this paper up for you right now and throw it away. And then I'll just see you at a court-martial. How's that sound? And, you know, this guy is really playing tough with me. And it's all because he thinks I've got pictures of this thing we saw. And I didn't. And a minute later, there's a knock at the door, and this major walks in, with oak leaves and no name tag, and what looks like a shaving kit under his arm. And I thought, this must be their hypnotist. And, I had been taking psychology classes for a couple of years at night, working on a BA, and I knew that I could not be hypnotized against my will. And now the drug they gave me, I found out since, was sodium amytal. And it's a short-acting hypnotic. And they must have given me several injections. And the major opens his little kit, and he's got a syringe in there, a little towel he lays out, a rubber hose to tie around my bicep, and some alcohol swabs, Band-Aid. He's talking to the agents at first, ignoring me. Then he switches his attention to me, and he turns on this great big smile and holds his hand out and says, "Sergeant Lovelace, it's so nice to finally meet you." And I said, "Yes, sir, nice to meet you too, sir." And he says, "Terry, for purposes of today's little exercise, would you call me Brad? That is my name." And it felt uncomfortable, but I said, "Yes, Brad." And he says, "And for purposes of today's little exercise, can I just call you Terry? That is your name." And I said, "Sure. Like, what am I going to say?" And then he says, "I understand you're from St. Louis." And I said, "Yeah, I'm from St. Louis." And he starts rattling off some landmarks and talking about the Cardinals and, kind of to establish common ground with me. And then I actually realize I'm starting to feel at ease with this guy. And I realize I'm 22 years old. I ain't that interesting. So I think he sensed that. I do. Because he abruptly changed. And he said, "Terry, this is important." And he's getting real close to me, encroaching into my personal space. And he says, "Terry, do you trust me?" And I thought, do I trust you? Like, how do I trust you? But I said what he wanted to hear. I said, "Yes, Brad, I trust you." And he says, "That's good. That's very good that you trust me." He said, "Now, Terry, I'm going to give you a little medication in your arm, and it'll be a real pleasant feeling." He says, "It'll make you feel like you had a few beers." And he winks at me and says, "You look like the kind of guy that enjoys a few beers on the weekend." And I thought, you expletive. What do you think? All enlisted guys drink? I was really offended by that.
Right.
But of course, I didn't say anything. And he took me through this hypnotic regression, progressive relaxation exercise. You're familiar with it, I'm sure.
Not entirely.
Tension in your scalp, release the tension in your arms, your legs, your toes, feeling relaxed, feeling 10 times more relaxed. And he says, "Now I want you to visualize the stairwell. Can you see the stairwell in your mind's eye, Terry? Take that first step and go down that first stair, feeling twice as relaxed now. Take another step down, the third step, now 3 times more relaxed. Every muscle loose, feeling safe, feeling warm, And he had this voice like a radio announcer. And it's just easy to listen to. And in my mind's eye, I'm going back up the stairwell. And I'm determined not to surrender my mind to this exercise. I'm playing Beatle music in my head. I'm doing everything I can not to give him my full attention. And I think that worked to some degree. But of course, I had no control over the sodium amytal. And I remember he asked me, he says, "And you and Toby went camping, right?" And I said, "Yes, Brad." And he says, "My, that must have been exciting. And you saw some funny lights in the sky, didn't you?" And I said, "Yes, that's right, Brad." And he says, "Were they stars, Terry?" And I said, "I don't know. I don't think so. I don't think they're stars." And he said, "Of course not. They're not stars, are they, Terry? What are they, Terry?" And I said, "It's a spaceship." And he said, "Who are they, Terry?" And I said, "They're the space people." And I could not believe that came out of my mouth. And the crazy thing was, I could see this all replay in my head like watching a movie. And I couldn't help but speak. I mean, I just, I've got these mental images flashing in my head. And when he asks me a question, I feel compelled to answer. And I guess that's the purpose of the sodium amytal, is to take away that inhibition, that desire to hold back.
Kind of like a truth serum.
Yeah. And there's no doubt in my mind. He knew what we saw. He asked for a description, and I told him everything that I saw. Funny thing, I overheard the captain say in the beginning of the hypnotic thing, I heard him say to the major, "I'm amazed every time I see him do this." And this is when he's going through the progressive relaxation part of the hypnosis session. And I heard that, and I thought, number one, that I wasn't supposed to hear that. And number two, I thought, my God, how many people do you guys hypnotize, And it was a long and arduous, it seemed like an hour had passed, but I was actually there closer to 4. And he actually dredged up from my subconscious memories that I wouldn't have today had they not hypnotized me.
Interesting.
Because this little hypnotic session of his pulled all this stuff into my conscious mind. And I mean, I don't think this is fantasy. I mean, I saw this stuff with my eyes. This was a memory I was reliving about being inside the ship and seeing these aliens. And I know it was real. It's haunted my sleep for 40 years. My wife and I had 2 adult children, 39 and 34. And all my kids ever knew was that, once or twice a year, Dad would wake up with screaming nightmares. But they never knew this until 2018 when I put this book up. And they're both scientists, right? So if you can't prove it through peer review, they're not interested.
Sure.
And they're like, "Dad, have you lost your mind?"
So,
their mom, my wife, and I sat down with them and said, "No, this really happened back when when your dad was in the Air Force."
So,
and yeah, go ahead.
Getting back to this hypnotic regression session that you're going through with Brad, he's trumping up some pretty interesting things as I was reading through on the book, and these really kind of come back to you, these haunting memories. But can you talk a little bit about, you saw these beings, you're inside the craft, kind of what happens? Give us a little bit of an idea of what happens inside as you're going through this hypnotic regression.
Sure. Unfortunately, I don't have a clear linear memory of exactly what happened. All I have is bits and pieces, and I don't think they're in any particular order, so I'll share with you the memories that Brad, the hypnotist, invoked, pulled forward, and a couple of these have become repeat nightmares that I frequently have. And I'll start with the worst one, the nightmare that scares me the most. And once this nightmare starts, and this is a PTSD issue, once it starts, I can't bail out of a dream. And it has to run its course. And what's crazy is I can be in the middle of another dream, and this invasive thought in the form of a dream will ease its way in and start to play. And I kind of have to wait for the tape to end. And it's frightening because I can't wake up. And unless my wife wakes me because I'm thrashing or something. But the memory of being in this ship was, and I don't know how we got there exactly, but the inside of this thing was twice as big as the outside. And I don't know how in the world that's possible. And I don't know if they put us in this thing and took us somewhere else. Because, man, the thing we were in was bigger. I mean, the thing that we saw was like a 5-story office building from the outside. From the inside, it looked like a football stadium. It was immense. And it had multiple levels, big, huge, open atrium. There were like these golf cart things without wheels that are scooting around. And there is this light. I mean, it was like every surface of this ship on the inside radiated light. And it hurt my eyes. And Toby and I were standing next to one another, and we're holding our clothing in our hands. And I'm hearing a woman screaming. And, you know, the screams come in different varieties. I mean, you know, you can say boo to somebody and they'll scream, you know, or somebody will suffer an injury, they'll suffer pain, and then there's a pain response, and that's a very sharp and distinct scream. This woman was in pain. And all I could move was my eyes. And my eyes are darting around, and I'm trying to take everything in that's inside this ship. And I had a curious sighting, and that was, there were these, I believe it was 6 total people. It could have been 5. There was one woman, and the rest were young men. They were about our age, you know, late teens, early 20s. They were dressed in tan flight suits with orange insignias of some kind, but they were too far away for me to read, and I didn't have a good field of view to see what the insignia said. I'd love to find out. And they had military-style haircuts, which wasn't the style in 1977. And I noticed their boots. They had what looked like issue combat boots to me. And
So,
they completely ignored us, would not look in our direction.
if I could just interject for a sec here, Terry, the thing that I found interesting here is, and you mentioned this in the book, as you're going through the hypnotic regression, Brad, this fellow interrogating you, he basically told you forget about what you saw with these guys in the tan flight suits. Isn't that correct?
That's correct. Not only that, but when I started that story, I heard the major say, "Oh, expletive," and paper shuffling, and I mean, it was like I struck a nerve with a dental drill. I don't know. I know that they were crew members, though, for this reason. This one kid who was blonde walked over to a panel in the wall and waved his hand across the wall, and something opened, slid across, and he did something, like he was pushing buttons, and then closed it. And then they walked away. And no question, they were absolutely crew members. And I think they were human.
Wow. Unbelievable. And now you remember seeing in the book, you talk about these aquariums that you've seen inside the craft. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. At one point, before we were standing there frozen, before the little gray guy stripped us of our clothing, we were marched down this long corridor, and on my right, there were these fish aquariums. And actually, walking is the wrong word. We were on some kind of automatic sidewalk thing like they have at the airport. We weren't walking, we were riding, more or less, standing up. And I'm looking at these aquariums. And during the hypnosis session, I'm feeling a lot of anxiety. And he says, "What do they look like, Terry?" And he kept saying, "You know, don't tell me what you think, just tell me what you see. Tell me what you see in your mind's eye, Terry." And, you know, that's what I did. And these fish aquariums of all sizes, and inside was pink water and what looked like embryos. And in some of the larger ones, there was an embryo that looked like a puppy to me. It with folds of skin over its head, and maybe ears, I'm not sure. But as I'm looking at it, an eye opened, and it scared me to death. And when I had that dream, I wake up screaming. I don't know what those things were, but I don't think they were human embryos. They may have been. I have no idea what they were.
I mean, do you think it's possible these were human alien hybrid embryos that you're seeing?
Yeah. I mean, I have nothing to base that on but conjecture, but yeah.
And
I think so.
These beings, the shorter ones that you're talking about now, are these the typical gray aliens that a lot of abductees have reported?
They are the same. They're ubiquitous gray guys. And I have a theory about them, and I'll share it with you briefly. I don't think they're living sentient beings like you and I think there may be a crossover between biological material, artificial intelligence, maybe quantum computing, nanotechnology, who knows what. But I think they are manufactured. I don't think that they're born, and I don't think that they're alive in the sense that you and I are. And I don't think they're all that smart.
And I've heard this similar stories about these the small gray alien creatures that perhaps they may be clones, and similar to what you're talking about, just the physical characteristics and the way they behave. So that's interesting. Now, were there any taller gray beings? Because those are also reported a lot too, and I've heard in abduction accounts.
When I was standing there frozen, before they took Toby, and I was standing there alone, and I heard him scream, "Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God," and then scream, and I thought, "Oh my God, what's coming up for me?" While that's going on, my eyes are darting all over, and the little gray guys are everywhere, and they're all walking like they're on a mission. And I saw this guy who was about 6 foot tall, and he had a chalkish, pinkish complexion and looked humanoid, except for really no ears, no nose, just a slit for a mouth. And he had black wraparound eyes, but not hyper-exaggerated like you see in the motion pictures. And just a little bit larger than a pair of Ray-Bans, really. And it's obvious that this guy is carrying himself with some kind of authority on this ship. And I'm straining my eyes to the left as far as they can go. And just by coincidence or happenstance, he turns his head and we locked eyes. This probably scared me as much or worse than anything else that happened on the thing. And that is that when we locked eyes, in a millisecond, this guy was in my head. And I mean, he must have downloaded my mind or something, because I knew he knew my life, he knew my dreams, he knew my secrets, he knew me. And all I got reflected back from those eyes was raw intellect. And it was damn scary. It was very scary.
And you talked about that a little bit in the book, and that is a very frightening aspect of this, and it's kind of as though they were just going about what they had to do without any regard for, I think you mentioned there's no anesthesia in the procedures, and that they're kind of just going about their business without any regard to maybe how you feel, how it's, painfully, how it's, it's hurting you with what they're doing. Can you talk a little bit more about that aspect?
Yes. Yeah. I was on the table. It finally came my turn, and they loaded me on the table. The gray guys did, like I was a plank of wood. And I'm screaming. And I'm filling my lungs with air, and I'm screaming as loud as I can, and I can't hear anything come out of my voice. I cannot hear anything. And at the foot of the table are a couple of graves, and there's this 7-foot tall insectoid-looking thing. Now, forever in my mind's eye, I picture him in a lab coat, but I'm sure he wasn't wearing a lab coat. And I was in a round room, domed, low ceiling, and this Dr. Bug is doing something to my lower spine, and it hurts. And I have early onset of degenerative spine disease, and I think I blame ET for my injury. But I'm screaming, and I guess I am making noise because I'm annoying this Dr. Bug thing. And it turns this big bulbous head with these two huge eyes into my direction and looks me in the eye. And I heard him in my head with crystal clarity. And he said, "Why are you screaming? Stop screaming. You know we don't hurt you. You know we take you back. Stop screaming." And he reached over and pecked me on the head with his finger, this big green digit, and I was out. And, I don't know if it's Stockholm Syndrome or what. The guy with the chalky pink complexion that got in my head scared me. But this Dr. Bug, I had the feeling that if we could sit down in different circumstances, that he would say, "Hey, man, just doing my job."
Sure.
I don't know if, I guess in their mind, under their sense of ethics for behavior, if you hurt someone and then erase the memory of it, it's okay. And that's kind of practiced in modern medicine today. There are several hypnotic drugs, Versed being the one that comes to mind, where they can give you the medication and you'll be relaxed. But there's an amnesia component to the medication, and you won't remember the unpleasantness of it. So in a way, we're kind of practicing what they were doing.
Right.
I guess they have a different code of ethics, I'm sure.
Interesting. Yeah, and going back to the OSI agents, because this is the part that kind of troubles me, is the fact that, and you already alluded to this, is that they seem to already know what had happened out there, that this craft had showed up, and just curious, what are your thoughts on that? I mean, why would they have already known about this? And I'm sure that you've thought about that many times, but how on earth did they already know about this event occurring?
In the last chapter, I gave 3 hypotheses. I opined, one, that we could be working shoulder to shoulder with ET toward a shared agenda. Number 2, ET could be in a quid pro quo, I hate to use that term, an exchange, this for that, where we give them free rein to abduct and experiment on X number of people and cattle in exchange for technology, so maybe it's a business relationship. Or the third option would be that they call the shots, we have no control, and we do what they say. And it's got to be one of those 3. It has to be one of those 3.
Yeah, it is certainly troubling to think about. And you mentioned there was there were other human captors on board the ship, and yeah, do you think that they were permanent passengers? I mean, I think you mentioned something about that in the book, if I'm right. But can you talk about that a little bit?
I can. And that's another subject of nightmares. There were other humans on board that thing. And we were segregated from them. They were kind of off to the side. And what I found so troubling was it was a mix of men, women, and children. And they were all like us. They were all nude. And they were frozen like us and could move nothing except their eyes. And when I looked to my right, I could see them fairly clearly. And they're all crying. And their eyes are darting all over the place. And that's just a frightening memory. And I tell you, I thought about it over the years, and they kicked Toby and me out, but those people stayed. They went up when that thing went up. And then David Paulides came on the scene a couple years back and started talking about state and national park disappearances. And I thought, oh my God, I'm glad we were able to get off the train. I don't know where those people went, but I wouldn't trade places with them for anything.
And it's interesting you mentioned David Paulides, Missing 411, the work he's done. It is truly disturbing to think that people are disappearing and there's no trace of them. And where the heck could they be going? I mean, there's some of these accounts, there's no trace of, blood, animal tracks, like if they were attacked by an animal. They just simply disappear. They're gone. They're vanished. They never reappear. And I think the number I'd heard is somewhere over 40,000 a year just in the United States alone.
Yes, that's the number I heard.
That they've never, ever found these people. And you have to wonder, to me, this seems like the most likely explanation. I mean, I don't know what else you could unless there's some sort of interdimensional thing where these people are disappearing into another dimension, some other warp. I mean, it's just bizarre. And it
is bizarre, and it's troubling.
It is. It's very troubling, and it makes me... Yosemite seems to have a large cluster of these cases, and it makes me never want to go camping at Yosemite, even though it's a beautiful place to visit.
I won't go camping in my backyard. So.
Yeah, I can't say that I blame you there. Now, talk a little bit about... Because you were a runner. You ran, I think you said 4 miles a day for many years. And then you discovered this some sort of weird thing above your knee. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I can. When I got out of the Air Force in 1979, and I started studying and, spending days in the library, I started putting on weight. And, we call it running now. And we don't think about seeing someone running on the street. But if you think about it, prior to about 1970, if you saw somebody on the street running, if somebody was chasing them, look through old pictures and old movies, you never see anyone out exercising, running on the street. They either ran on an athletic field or not at all. If you were running in the city, you'd be arrested, for flight,
Sure.
So it was a new fad, is my point. And I embraced it. I enjoyed the endorphins. I enjoyed the ability to control my weight. And but I noticed that from 1979, every time I would hit the 2-mile mark in my run, I'd have a spot on my right knee that would go absolutely numb. And I mean numb like like a shot of Novocaine from your dentist, kind of numb and itchy. And I asked my doctor about it, and she said, it's probably some kind of histamic reaction. I wouldn't worry about it. If it doesn't affect your run, I wouldn't give it a concern. So I didn't, until 2012. And in 2012, I had a problem with my right knee. I couldn't put weight on it. It hurt like mad just to try to stand. And I get all my medical care from the VA. And since I left government service, I don't get health care anymore. And I have no complaints about the VA. I don't mean it that way. But my wife took me to the VA and sat in the ER for a while, and then a PA examined me and they rolled me into the X-ray room, and an X-ray tech took a shot of my knee, 2 shots. One was called a PA for posterior anterior, and then a shot from the side, one head on and one sideways. And she says, I hear her playing around with the films. It's all digital now. The films come out pretty quick. And she says, Sir Lovelace, or Mr. Lovelace, have you ever been in a combat situation or something to account for a piece of metal in your leg? And I said, no, I was fortunate. I never left the States. And she took 2 more pictures and then 2 more pictures. And she said, I'm going to have the radiologist come down and take a look. And I said, hey, look, I was a medic in the Air Force, and, I practiced healthcare law for most of my career. I'm comfortable around medical people. They're my X-rays. Can I see what you're talking about? And she's like, sure. So she pulls them out, pops them in a light box. And I didn't see it at first, but really, if you look at the X-ray, you don't need a medical degree to see it. It looks like an electronic component in my knee, above my knee, and lateral toward the right. And then in the calf of my leg muscle, the calf muscle of my leg rather, there are half a dozen little tic-tac shaped items, and they're arranged in a floral pattern with a little dot in the middle. And the radiologist comes down, and first he looks at the film that has the piece of metal with the 2 wires attached to it, about the size of a fingernail. And he walks over to my leg, and he pokes me in the leg and says, the scar will be right here. And he asked me to take off my pants. He wanted to look at my leg. And he was amazed. He was frustrated. And he says, I know it's got to be here. And he went as far as to kill the overhead lights. I mean, the X-ray room is dark anyway. And get out a little handheld, looked like a black light. And he said that scar tissue will fluoresce under a black light. And what he was concerned about is the lack of scar tissue. He said anytime that you violate the integrity of your skin and you go deep enough into fascia to embed an item like that, there's going to be a scar. And you can't avoid it. There's going to be scar tissue, residual scar tissue. And he looked at my leg for 10 minutes. And I said, Doc, I ain't got no scar there. I've never had an accident. I've never had an injury to that knee. There is no scar. And he was just blown away. And I asked him, I said, hey, Doc, how often is it that you find a foreign object under the skin without there being a corresponding scar? And he said, never. I've been a radiologist 23 years. I've never seen it. He said, sometimes the scars can migrate an inch or 2, depending on your weight and passage of time, but you have no scar. He says, I can't account how this thing got under your skin. And then he addressed the thing in my calf. I have these things in my calf muscle, and he says, I thought this was peculiar. He says, on X-ray film, they appear to be the same consistency as bone tissue, but I think not. It's that, but I think not, that I wondered about. And he says, bone tissue doesn't just sprout in the middle of the muscle. So he says, I don't know what this is. It's a new one on me. And I'm on the way home, and my wife and I are driving. She's driving with my leg, and all of a sudden I have flashbacks to 1977. And I'm thinking, the numb spot on my knee when I run 2 miles. And I put it all together, and it all made sense. And that was the catalyst. That was the event that made me determined to write a book and tell as many people as I can and speak whenever I can, because you said it within the first 4 minutes of our broadcast. You said people need to know the truth, and the truth is important. I know that from law. I see the importance of truth. So, I try to tell my story without embellishment. Some of the things are so outrageous, it's hard to ask people to believe and accept. And you don't have to. But just be aware that it's a big universe and there's a lot of crazy things out there.
Yeah, Tara, as you say, first of all, thank you so much for coming out and sharing the story. There's just so much more coming out, it seems like, nowadays. Now we've got the Navy coming out and saying, yeah, these cockpit videos, they're the real thing. I mean, they're tracking UFOs. And I'm just curious what your take is on this, because, first of all, horrible the way the OSI treated you. I think about that. You're a lawyer. You think about them making you sign those papers. I mean, a lawyer could have tore that to pieces. I mean, you were in no condition, first of all, to be reviewing all the paperwork and knowing exactly what you're signing. And I suppose that was part of their plan to begin with. But it just saddens me. I said I had a 25-year Air Force career, 13 years of those of active duty, another 12 as an IMA reservist. I had a great career. I really did. But it saddens me to hear that people who have experienced these things like yourself, the way they were treated and the way they were dealt with, nobody who's a military member like that deserves to be treated that way. It's sad. And, it just bothers me that to think that that's the way people who back in those days had these encounters, the way they were dealt with. I'm curious to know now, the way you see things now, do you think people are still treated this way, or do you think it's handled a lot differently?
Boy, I don't know.
And I'm just kind of would like to get your take. I always do when I have, guests on who've written about the UFO phenomena, abductions, that sort of thing. So, you mentioned in passing, you mentioned Tom DeLonge, To the Stars Academy. We have all this effort going on. And there seems to be some level, I would say probably soft disclosure. We haven't had the government officially come out and say, yeah, UFOs are real, not in any sort of official capacity. We did have Christopher Sherwood. It was DoD spokesman say ATIP did exist and it was involved in studying UFOs. So I think that's kind of a soft disclosure. Where do you see things going on the UFO front, and are you optimistic about where things are going right now?
I wish I could say I was more optimistic, but I have some concerns about where we're headed and what may be around the corner.
Yeah, and I think I'm cautiously optimistic, but I'm just getting my sense from what I've read and what I've heard that, these draconian measures that used to be in place and what you had to deal with in the 70s kind of seem to have somewhat disappeared. And it's almost as if now we're in a spot, and again, this is just my opinion, is that we're kind of in a spot now where the government's not really coming out and saying anything. They don't seem to be spreading disinformation like they were years ago. At least that's my sense. Maybe they are at some level. But perhaps we are getting closer just based on that. But again, that is just my opinion on where we're at.
I think you're absolutely spot on.
So getting back to, kind of your sense of where things are, so it sounds like you're a little bit more optimistic, but still very cautiously optimistic. Is that fair to say?
Well, I'm optimistic about disclosure. Disclosure's coming. But yeah, there's been a lot transpired. I'll stop there. I'll just say that I'm cautiously optimistic. I'm concerned that, and I don't want to be an alarmist. I really don't. But I'm concerned that, there are unfriendly entities out there and friendly entities out there. And, there could be some kind of war.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. I had Rob Shelsky on the show probably 2 or 3 episodes ago. He wrote the book Deadly UFOs, and he doesn't think these guys are our space brothers. He thinks, and I would imagine based on your experience, you probably don't think they are either. But it sounds like you also are open to the idea that there may be more benevolent ETs visiting us. Is that kind of where you sit on this?
Yeah, I think there are different races, and I think that they have different agendas, and I think some are benign, some are benevolent, and some are malevolent. For whatever reason, they didn't kill us, so I'm grateful to them for that. But if the guy with the pinky chalkish complexion ever came up to me, I would shoot him dead without a moment's hesitation. I got nothing but evil from him, from those eyes. There was no empathy. There was just frightening.
Sure.
And if those are the guys that attack our civilization, we're screwed. Because they controlled my mood. They had total control over us.
Yeah,
and those poor people that were left in the ship, they had total control over them.
It is frightening to think about. The more I've interviewed people, I mentioned Rob Shelsky, now this conversation, it's certainly, if I do see a UFO, I'm not sure I want to sit around too long, especially if it's in close proximity to be filming this thing, because you never know what's going to happen. But at this point, I think we'll go ahead and wrap up here, Terry. But if you could share, and I would like to talk for just a minute offline after we're done here. If you could share, where listeners can find your work, whether you have a website, anything like that, where they can find the work that you do.
Yes, I have a website. It's terrylovelace.com. Very easy. And you can purchase my book there or on Amazon. It's in, I believe the Kindle version is still $2.99, and it's in paperback with all the pictures and the X-rays. And then I did an audio book that sells very well. Matter of fact, I was real happy on Amazon. 19 months now after its release, I hit number 1 in genre last month on Kindle and number 2 in genre on the audio book. So people seem to really like to listen to the audio book. It's kind of a fun way to do it. I was told to hire a voice artist. I didn't want to do that, not because of the cost, but because I wanted it to be in my own voice. I don't have a radio voice, I don't think, but at least it's my story.
Sure. And
yeah, so on Amazon, it's Incident at Devlis Den. My Facebook page is Incident at Devlis Den. There's a Shop Now button there, too. So, yeah, Incident at Devlis Den on Amazon. Read my reviews. I've got 4.6 out of 5 stars with 250 reviews. So it's been well received, and I think your audience would enjoy it. The opportunity to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Any UFO conferences or anything coming up that you're speaking at?
Yes, I'm speaking with Leslie Keene at Rice University this Friday. We are invited guests of the Humanities Department, and we'll be speaking to the entire Humanities faculty and PhD candidates in a closed session, no cameras and no public invited. So that'll be interesting. I'm looking forward to that. Here's an academic setting that's taking a serious interest in this subject, and I'm thinking that hopefully that's a change in attitude, and maybe the beginning of embracing this as a science and not a pseudoscience, or take it out of the classification of paranormal and put it into the classification of something to be maybe studied by peer review. Who knows?
Yeah.
So, I have that. I'm speaking at in San Francisco at Alien Con. I should be at Roswell again this year. And Contact in the Desert. And hopefully, if Karen comes through, UFO Congress again. And then the Eureka Springs UFO Conference in Eureka Springs, Arkansas in April. So come, see me if you can. I'd love to meet you, hear your story. Take all the time in the world to talk to you. So, it's going to be a busy year.
Great. Well, hey, once again, Terry, thank you so much for joining me, and what a great day for us to talk and do this interview on Veterans Day of all days. Thank you again for your service. Thank you for sharing your story and coming out and doing this. Again, I think we all need to hear more truth about this subject, and I really appreciate you coming out and sharing your story and talking with me.
Yes, thank you so much for the time.
Okay, so that's going to do it for tonight's show, and big thanks to Terry for joining me on the show again. I've been trying to make this interview happen for some time, so it was amazing to be able to talk with Terry and learn about what is really quite a disturbing abduction account. The other thing I want to mention is, coming into the holiday period, there's normally an episode. I normally put out an episode on the 1st and 15th of every month. I will not be putting out a 15 December episode this month. I have a lot of things going on going into the holidays, and I'm trying to finish up the book. And so I'm going to go ahead and forgo the 15 December episode and go back to regular programming starting in the new year on 1 January. And hopefully we'll be going into 2020 with a bang. I'm really looking forward to a lot of great interviews, a lot of great shows in 2020. Again, thank you so much for tuning into the show, and have a great night, everybody.